Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I am your host Deepak. Today we have the privilege of welcoming Professor Venkat Venkatraman, a distinguished Professor Emeritus at Custrom School of Business, Boston University. In this episode, Professor Venkatraman, a leading expert in digital strategy, presents a pioneering playbook designed to help industrial companies blend their core strength, crafting physical products, with the digital expertise of leveraging algorithms and AI to analyze vast interconnected datasets. This approach enables strategy connections that were previously unattainable. Professor Venkatraman, it's a true delight to have you on this podcast. We are thrilled and honored to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Deepak.
Yeah. Professor Venkatraman, could you begin by providing a brief overview of your book and explaining what inspired you to collaborate with Professor Vijay Govindrajan on this project?
Yeah, I think the inspiration for this book came at the end of my last book called The Digital Matrix. And when I wrote The Digital Matrix, my focus was on getting leaders to consider the fact that you cannot simply look at digital technologies to support the implementation of the current strategies, but really think about the role of digital in shaping the new future strategies. And the argument that I made was that the competitive landscape is shifting because the customer problems are solved by both the ambitious tech entrepreneurs that don't have the legacy of the incumbents, and you also have the digital giants coming into industries because they can solve the problems at scale and speed that the industrial incumbents are not able to do. So arguing that every industry is becoming digital, the digital matrix asks companies to look at the interplay across multiple types of players across multiple phases. When I finished that book, my longtime friend and colleague Vijay Govindrajan and I started talking. He had just finished his book on the three-box solution. He comes at it from a strategy and innovation perspective. I approach the problem from a digital and a strategy perspective. And as we started talking, we realized that much of what we know today comes from the consumer industries, or what we called as the asset light sector, and that the asset heavy sectors, which is the bulk of the economy, the digital transformation has not had that much of an impact. And many leaders continue to believe that maybe technology will only impact asset light sectors like photography and advertising and telecommunication and media, but not manufacturing, logistics, buildings, construction, agriculture, and so on. So we said we'll focus on the industrial sector and develop a playbook to focus on why they should elevate digital, especially data and AI, as the driver of strategy going forward.
Okay, yeah. Could you elaborate on the central idea of fusion strategy and describe how it integrates physical product expertise with digital technologies?
Yeah. So again, if you think about the simple idea of fusion, it's really combining two different domains to create something that cannot be done by the two separately, right? So we are fusing something together. So what if we take the digital domain and fuse it with the industrial domain? I studied mechanical engineering, and there was a separate branch called electrical engineering. There was a separate branch later on about computer science. And these were independent domains of study. Fusion basically says every one of these scientific disciplines will be infused with digital thinking. So which means we don't think about an automobile just as an industrial product. We look at an automobile as a set of computers on wheels connected to the cloud. That means the architecture of the product itself changes. So what we argue in the fusion strategy is that product architecture changes, the underlying process by which things get completed changes, whether it is designing a product, manufacturing a product, or servicing a product. It's changed because of digital technologies. Service delivery will be changed, and we can come back later and talk about it. And when you look at this fusion, the old industrial age organization is not adequate to deal with the opportunities and threats that companies will face as every industry becomes more digital, every product becomes more digital, every processes get re-architected differently, and so on and so forth. So that is the logic of fusion strategy. It is the interconnection between the physical domain and the digital domain that unlocks new value.
Very insightful. How can companies leverage real-time data to drive operational efficiency and enhance decision-making processes?
Yeah. And again, when we started looking at what makes the current world very different from the role of digitization in the late 1990s or even early 2000s, it's our ability to collect real-time data, right? So when we wrote the Harvard Business Review article, 2 years back, where we said the data graphs are the new competitive advantage for companies. And that's now in the chapter 2 of the book, if you will. And the idea of real-time data is to really get us to think about the fact that these digital companies have access to real-time data. Amazon has access to real-time data when we are on their web, on their mobile device. Apple has real-time data when we use iOS. Google has real-time data with Chrome, Android, and Waymo, and every other part of Google as you think about it. That's what Facebook does. That's what Netflix does. So we developed this idea called data graph, and the data graph is really the ability of a company to understand how customers are interacting with the product. And we pose this question: what is it that you uniquely know about the customers at the point of interaction? And how do you leverage it to win at the moment of truth, which is when they buy your product, when they interact with your product, and when they want to repeat buy your product or continue to come back and access your services, right? So real-time data is the basis for constructing data graphs. And once we created the logic of data graph, we said Netflix has movie graph, LinkedIn has professional graph, Spotify has music graph, Google has search graph, Amazon has purchase graph, which means every company has got to ask the question, what is their distinctive data graph? And now if you think about the idea a little bit more, the argument that we started making was that if you don't have access to the real-time data, even if you're a B2B company, you should be part of the B2B2C data value chain and understand it, because if you don't understand it, you are only reacting to it and you cannot be proactive about it, right? So that's the idea of the power of the real-time data, is that you can be proactive instead of reactive. And then the big idea that I like our listeners to take away is that the data network effects, which means I learn across settings. And once I learn across settings, I can now look at an early warning signal from one segment or one particular set of activities, and then learn from that and then adapt to others, which is what we can do when we go from descriptive analysis to predictive analysis. And so that's the power of the real-time data, which increasingly with sensors and software and cloud connectivity, more and more companies can take advantage of.
Okay, yeah. In what ways does AI act as a crucial enabler for innovation within the industrial sector? And how does it impact areas like predictive maintenance and supply chain optimization?
Yeah. Again, if we look at the industrial companies, they have data and what I would call as systems of records. They will know what they bought from a supplier. They will know what the problems with the supplier was in terms of quality, cost, reliability. The purchasing managers would have that data. Then you go into design. We've got very good databases on alternative components how they interacted, what is the final design, what's the cost of the final design, which design we rejected, which design we accepted. And that data is not connected to suppliers. Then we go into manufacturing. Once a dominant design is chosen, it goes to manufacturing. And then we got data on manufacturing, which production line was efficient, which production line was not efficient, and so on and so forth. Then we delivered that product. The dealers then got data on who actually bought the product. And if there are repairs needed, the dealers had the data on what kind of repairs that they delivered, right? So all of these are siloed data. Now, when you start connecting across all of them, you now have an end-to-end view. Once you have an end-to-end view, you can start putting in place the Gen AI capability to ask a set of questions that otherwise we cannot ask. And the reason I'm highlighting the Gen AI is because even managers that don't fully understand how the interconnections work can ask the most strategic question. Why did this product fail? What is it that we have learned when the product failed last time that we should now incorporate so that we can react better to the customer? These are what a strategist will ask. Now, with the Gen AI, these can be questions that can be asked in a natural way. And the underlying AI technology now not answer the question with the siloed views that says it was a design fault or a manufacturing fault, but can give a much richer, deeper understanding of why something happened, right? So once you have this end-to-end view, or what we call in our book, the integrated digital twins, where it's not just digital twin at the level of products, it's not digital twin at the level of process, it's a digital twin at the level of the customer. When you put it all together, the AI algorithms are able to now look for reasons for failure and reasons for future failure in a much more comprehensive fashion, rather than look at it in terms of independent functional silos. That's the investment that companies need to make in order to become a digital industrial company, rather than an industrial company that uses piecemeal technologies in individual functions to solve very localized problems.
Yeah. Professor, what strategic adaptations are necessary for companies to thrive in the era of Industry 4.0? And how can they prepare for and implement these changes?
Yeah, I think if you go back to the industrial age and think about what did we learn from the industrial age during the transition from the pre-industrial age, which is agrarian, right? In the agrarian, we had individual functions. So there was a farmer, there was a butcher, there was a carpenter, right? There was individual skills, the guilds, if you will, right? We brought the same idea into the organization. We said, you're a marketing person, you're a manufacturing person, you are a human resource person, you're a designer, you're a salesperson, you're a service person. We created these functional silos, and then we gave the CEO, the chief executive officer, this superpower to somehow integrate all this. In order to optimize the individual functions, we let the individual functions design their technology that made sense for them. So the designers looked at technology that optimized design. The manufacturing embraced technology that optimized manufacturing. When you now take an Industry 4.0, which is cyber physical, which is also fusion, now if you take the view of real-time data on top of that, the real-time data should not stay within one function. Real-time data should cut across. Because if something fails, if I can inform my supplier that this is happening under these conditions, they can fix it. Or if you can now say that my customer is asking for a better product because their payload is higher because of the tractor under these conditions, or trucks under these conditions, or driving under hot condition compared to cold condition, that can go right through the supply chain, and people can make modification that are now micro-segment targeted than otherwise. So when we get to Industry 4.0, the value that is going to be unlocked is reducing a lot of inefficiency, but also creating a lot of opportunities for end customers to use the product and get better value from the product than otherwise. And that's all going to happen because of interconnected data, what we call as data value chain, and then AI that is infused on top of that to go from descriptive analytics to predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics.
How do advancements in AI and digital technologies affects employment within industrial sector? You also talk about, upskilling and reskilling of the workforce. So what skills are becoming increasingly important, and how should companies approach this method?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that we've not spent as much time in the book as we would have liked is really the interconnection between business and human resources, right? Because what is going to happen with this technology is that it is going to make a lot of the current jobs obsolete. So there'll be a set of structural underemployment of certain skills. At the same time, we need new set of skills. People that what I call as the fusion thinking, which is industrial engineers that understand the power of digitization, right? The designers that understand the power of data and analytics, manufacturing people that are able to create modular manufacturing systems, right? When you look at Tesla as an example, they rethought the manufacturing entirely with the GigaPress, where they're able to track from one end to the other end everything that is happening during manufacturing. That requires manufacturing people, but not as many people, because much of that is computerized. But the manufacturing people on the Tesla shop floor is a very different person than the manufacturing person on what would have been on the GM shop floor, or Mahindra shop floor, or the Tata shop floor 5-10 years back. So we shouldn't really look at this as labels, but should go down and look at this in terms of skills. And once you look at in terms of skills required for manufacturing, skills required for design and for marketing, then you got to say, can I now upskill and reskill the existing people? Or do I now position myself in the talent marketplace and attract new people to come in that may not have otherwise come into my organization, right? Because they may say, oh, no, this is a tractor manufacturing company like Mahindra. But if Mahindra is able to articulate that the tractor tomorrow is very different than the tractor in the 20th century, they attract a different level of skill. So changing the composition of the skill base is an important leadership issue, and is really the interdependency between the business people articulating the skills that they need and the human resource then deciding what proportion of the talent can be upskilled and reskilled, and what proportions are going to be new blood coming into the organization.
Professor, why is it important for companies to build collaborative ecosystems? And how can they effectively do so to drive shared success?
Yeah, because for a long time, we thought the competitive advantage is what I control. As a company, I control. But in reality, it is all a set of interconnected companies coming together to solve the problem. Again, this is what we learned by looking at an industry that's becoming digital, right? The computer architecture is an ecosystem architecture, right? So NVIDIA makes the chip. Somebody else makes the software. They may interconnect, but it doesn't have to be tightly coupled. Somebody else then creates the hardware using that, like Figure or Tesla, right? Then somebody else could make the operating system. Somebody else can create the application. Somebody else has created the cloud. Somebody has the database. Somebody has the analytics, right? And somebody else creates a user interface, right? If we now look at the tech stack, tech stack used to be vertically integrated during IBM time. And then ever since Microsoft introduced the idea of modular architecture in PC, and then even now, if you take a look at our telephone, our smartphone, when you look at an Apple iPhone, it says designed by Apple in California, but assembled in India, assembled in Vietnam, assembled in China, right? So you have to figure out which part of the vertical integration do you want to control and which part do you want to rely on others. Foxconn is a very important player for Apple's success. For a company like Google that has Waymo, for Waymo, the car manufacturers are important partners because Waymo is not going to manufacture cars. Ecosystem becomes much more important. So every company has got to ask, who are their preferred set of partners? What is it that I bring to the ecosystem that my partners can't get from anybody else, right? And once you're able to articulate what you bring to the ecosystem that is unique, inimitable, very valuable, that others cannot provide, you realize that you need to now partner with them rather than compete with them. In some cases, you may have to compete with them. And managing in that ecosystem, the inevitable tension between competition and cooperation is now a new strategic requirement. It's a new leadership requirement. That's why we highlight the idea of ecosystem. And again, going back to my previous book, The Digital Matrix, I talked about co-creating capabilities. A company is not a portfolio of products. Company is a portfolio of capabilities assembled and accessed through relationships. Not all capabilities can be ever owned by a single company.
What are some common cultural resistances companies face when implementing digital strategies? And how can they overcome these challenges to foster a mindset of innovation and adaptability?
Yeah. Change is hard, right? Change is hard for individuals because we become successful doing certain things that we think we know how to do. And we assume that that is going to be enough to compete in the future. So I say in my lectures, successful companies fail because they overinvest in what they are good at today and underinvest in what they need to be good at tomorrow. Successful companies fail because they overinvest in what they're good at today and underinvest in what they need to be good at tomorrow. Change requires us to reallocate our resources. And what are the resources we have? My time, money, and technology, right? People, financial resources, and technological resources. Change requires us to rethink all of those resources away from where we've been good at and where we need to be good at tomorrow. And that's tough because it's easy to go back and look at your budget and make incremental changes to your resource allocation. So what I urge the companies to do is to really look at, will you be relevant in the future? And in order to be relevant in the future, what are the resources you need to be good at? What are the capabilities you need to master? And what are the partners that you need to work with in order to deliver that value in the future? Future is not an extrapolation of the past. That means it's not something that happens during certain periods. Change is something that happens continuously, right? And so that's the mindset that companies need to develop.
Yeah. Professor, can you share any case studies from the book that illustrate successful implementation of fusion strategies?
Yeah. I also want the listeners and the viewers to take the view that we wrote this book actually as what we consider to be the next practice book rather than the best practice book, right? Because the difference is that when you know a phenomenon and you write the best practice, you've distilled a lot of principles by looking at a lot of cases. We on the other hand, said, we're going to now look at a few cases and project what could happen in the future. That means lots and lots of companies are in various stages of the transition from industrial world to the digital world. And fusion strategy is really a way for us to think about how the roadmap over the next 5-7 years will evolve. And our roadmap is really about an industrial company becoming a fusion product company. And there we said, let's take a look at John Deere as a company that's now making the tractor with lots of sensors, connectivity to the cloud, and to be able to collect real-time data on how the tractors are performing on the road. Products is just a starting point for the industrial fusion. The next one we said is services. Now, an industrial company can say, we can deliver fantastic services when you tell me what the problem is. But with real-time data, with telematics and the software and the sensors, the cloud connectivity, I should be able to predict when your tractor is likely to fail and fix. Now, fixing it requires to have over-the-air software updates. Now, over-the-air software updates is already common in the automotive industry, as you see in Tesla. But we can now apply the same logic to tractors, to trailers, to trucks, to rails. And then you can deliver fusion services, which is to optimize the product for the condition. And again, connect back to what I said earlier about the data network effects. If I know that this particular plow is doing a better job for this level of agriculture and under these climatic conditions, I can now learn across all of that and then tell a farmer in Iowa to do things differently than the farmer in Nebraska compared to a farmer in Nasik or a farmer in China, right? So that's where the data network effects start to come in. So start looking at every industry and look at the companies that are in this transition. Then we went to fusion systems. As I said, the ecosystem, no individual product is enough to solve all problems. There we looked at Honeywell and said what Honeywell is trying to do is to put together a system of systems in order to solve what the buildings are, what the building requires, or what an aircraft company will require. There are many, many companies like that. So we really have to get companies to look less about today's best practice and start asking the question, what is needed to win in each of the battlegrounds? And in the book, we talk about 4 battlegrounds, right? The product battleground, the service battleground, the systems and the solutions battleground.
Professor, any key 3 lessons from the book you want to deliver to our listeners?
Well, I think the biggest lesson is every industry is going to become digital sooner rather than later, right? In the analog to digital world, like photography, music, advertising, it happened fast, enabled by one technology, that's the smartphone, right? Once we deployed 5 billion smartphones in the world, lots and lots of things simply became an app inside the smartphone, right? A camera is an app inside the smartphone. A calculator is an app inside the smartphone, right? And you can go on and talk about every piece that's now an app inside the smartphone. The availability of that one device accelerated the digital transformation in the asset light sector. In the asset heavy sector, it's going to take a little longer, but we should never assume that our industry is not going to become digital, because it's going to happen in terms of product, processes, services, and business models. The second, and maybe a more important issue, is think about your data as real-time data, what we call as data in motion, rather than data at rest. Most companies know how to analyze data at rest rather than analyze data in motion, real-time, right? Twitter is real-time, Facebook is real-time, Amazon is real-time. We should now bring the same functionality to industrial companies. And third, and maybe the more important issue, is ultimately it's the combination of humans and machines working together. We're going to automate a lot, but ultimately humans are going to be important. So the leadership challenge is really understanding the fusion between human skills and machine skills, smart humans and powerful machines, pushing the frontier, redesigning the organizational architecture, and figuring out how to unlock value in the future rather than take the old industrial model and just add technology to it.
Thank you, Professor Venkatraman, for sharing your valuable insights and research on this groundbreaking book. This book is a game changer, offering revolutionary ideas that have the potential to change the industry. It is our honor to have you on this podcast episode, and looking forward to reading the Digital Matrix in the coming days. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good luck.